Just moments ago, we were hearing from leaders of both parties after a high-stakes meeting at the White House with President Trump in attendance. But it doesn't appear that we are any closer to getting a funding bill, which means a federal government shutdown could just be a little over 24 hours away. I want to get right out to our Nathaniel Reed, who is live for us on Capitol Hill, to tell us a little bit more about what came out of this meeting, if anything. Nate?
Well, look, not a deal. I mean, we heard from Democrats, we heard from Republicans. Democrats painted what sounded like a slightly rosier picture than Republicans did about the possibility of a shutdown. Republicans seemed fairly dug in. They held up the copy of that government funding bill and said, look, we have 32 less hours to get this thing passed and prevent a government shutdown. They were asked, though, about the possibility of the layoffs of federal employees, something that Russ Vought, who spoke there, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, had previously threatened in a memo that came from his department last week, basically saying that to a memo to various heads of agencies that they might lay off members of the federal workforce as a result of this government shutdown. Vice President J.D. Vance didn't really engage with that question. He kind of walked past it. What they made clear, though, is that they are not seeing eye to eye with Democrats on not necessarily the issues, but when they want these issues to be addressed, something that J.D. Vance addressed during his remarks with the press. Let's take a listen.
Republicans in the House and the Senate, President United, they've passed the bill. This is sitting right now at the Senate desk. We could pick it up and pass it tonight. We could pick it up and pass it tomorrow before the government shuts down. And then we don't have a government shutdown. It is totally up to the Democrats because right now they are the only thing standing between the American people and the government shutting down.
They had some ideas that I actually thought were reasonable, and they had some ideas that the president thought was reasonable. What's not reasonable is to hold those ideas as leverage and to shut down the government unless we give you everything that you want.
Now, let's back up here, Steph. The reason that Democrats are needed at all to prevent a government shutdown is because Republicans in the Senate, though they have a majority, they don't have the votes. You need 60 votes to pass the vast majority of legislation. There are only 53 Republican senators, meaning they will need some Democrats to cross party lines and support that short-term funding bill to keep the government open. Now, does that seem likely? At this point, not so much. Both parties appear to be fairly dug in on their position. There's a lot of questions about whether Democrats could possibly cave here, about whether they could abandon some of these demands in exchange for keeping the government open. I was actually just at a press conference a couple of moments ago with Democratic members of Congress and senators from Maryland and Virginia, two states outside of here in Washington, D.C., that have very high concentrations of federal employees. I asked them if they're concerned about the possibility of layoffs of federal workers if the government does shut down. They told me that they are presenting a united front. They believe that the Trump administration is using that as a negotiating tactic to try and force Democrats to the table. They kind of ultimately implied they viewed it as an empty threat. A lot of questions about what direction things go. There's some chance that we could hear from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer at any moment here in the U.S. Senate. It appeared that they were possibly preparing a press conference downstairs when the leaders arrived back from the White House. But at this point, Steph, the headline here, Republicans don't have the votes. They need Democrats' support. Democrats not willing to lend that support. Both parties are dug in. And if they remain dug in, if neither side caves, in less than 32 hours, you and I will be talking not about a shutdown deadline, but about how to get out of a government shutdown, Steph.
Right, and with the House out of session this week, in the Senate, it's really accepting the House-passed version. Otherwise, we are really facing a shutdown. Anything that Democrats might get in exchange would have to be on later votes, on some other piece of legislation, some other type of promise or compromise to try to get something done later. But avoiding a shutdown certainly feels really unlikely to me.
The real question here, Steph, and I'm glad you touched on this, is that in order to pass a more comprehensive solution, something different, Speaker Johnson would have to call the House of Representatives back. They're effectively on vacation this week. They're in their home districts. They held a conference call earlier today, a member on that call telling me Speaker Johnson told Republican members of Congress that he thought that there was going to be a government shutdown. Again, that's what one member told me was the outcome of that call. But look, it would require bringing all the members back to D.C. within the next 24 hours if they want to vote on some sort of alternative to this plan, which has already passed in the House of Representatives. They're waiting for the Senate to pass it. Again, a lot of questions about whether a government shutdown could be imminent here. At this point, it certainly seems like it is, Steph.
Right, and this government shutdown has the potential to certainly be different than any other before. There's the guarantee of back pay for federal employees, but at the same time, there's the threat of permanent layoffs with this reduction in force memo from the Office of Management and Budget. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reid. Sure, you will keep track of all of this for us over the next 30-plus hours. Thank you very much, my friend.